Good morning, boys and girls. Here we go with chapter 19, which is going into part 3, the rat. And as we ended chapter 18, we see that coming out of the tunnel was the rat that Vicus had hit, and he's got that terrible scar on his face and knocked him into the river. So let's see what happens. "Stay, you!" cried Vicus, as Luxa, Henry, and Merith sprang up, swords in hand. "Stay, you!" The rat regarded the three-armed humans with amusement. "Yes, stay you, or I shall be forced to move, and that always puts me in an ill humor," he said languidly. Luxa and Merith stopped uncertainly, but Henry ignored Vicus's command and lunged at the rat. Without moving another muscle, the rat flicked its tail. It crackled like a whip, knocking the sword from Henry's hand. The blade spun across the stone floor and slammed into the cavern wall. Henry gripped his wrist in pain. "The hardest lesson for a soldier to learn is to obey orders he believes are wrong," said the rat. Philosophically. "Take care, lad, or you shall end up like me, stripped of any respectable rank and warming your shabby old hide at the fire of your enemies." The rat nodded at the old man, Vicus. "Rip Red," said Vicus with a smile. "We have just commenced dining. Will you join us?" "I thought you'd never ask," said Rip Red, pushing himself off the wall and slouching over to the fire. He squatted back on his haunches next to Solivet. "My dear Solivet, how kind of you to fly out to greet me, and with a war on, too." "I could scarcely have missed an opportunity to break bread with you, Rip Red," said Solivet. "Oh, come now. You know perfectly well you only tagged along to wheedle information out of me," said Rip Red, "and to gloat over your victory at the flames." "I destroyed you," said Solivet with glee. "Your army turned tail and ran howling into the river." "Army?" snorted Rip Red. "Why, they were as much an army as I am a butterfly. I'd have stood a better chance fighting with crawlers." The rat looked at Temp and Tick, who were cowering against the wall, and sighed. "Present company accepted, of course." Boots frowned and toddled over to Rip Red. She pointed her chubby finger up at him. "You mouse?" "Yes, I'm a mouse. Squeak, squeak. Now shoo back to your little bug friends," said Rip Red, picking up a hunk of dry beef. He tore off a piece with his teeth and noticed Boots hadn't moved. He pulled back his lips to reveal a row of jagged teeth and gave her a sharp hiss. "Ooh!" said Boots, scurrying to her roaches. "Ooh!" "Don't do that," said Gregor. The rat turned his glowing eyes on him, and Gregor was shocked by what he saw there. The intelligence, the deadliness, and most surprisingly, the pain. This rat was not like Fanger and Shed. He was much more complicated and much more dangerous. For the first time in the Underland, Gregor felt completely out of his league. If he fought this rat, he wouldn't stand a chance. He would lose. He would be dead. "Ah, this must be our warrior," said Rip Red softly. "How very like your daddy you are." "Don't scare my sister," said Gregor, trying to keep his voice steady. "She's only a baby." "From what I hear, she's got more guts than the lot of you combined," said Rip Red. "Of course, courage only counts when you can count. I'm presuming the rest of you can count and will be screwing your courage to the sticking place at any minute now." The rat glanced around at Luxa, Merith, and Henry, who were keeping their distance. The bats were extending and folding their wings, unsure of what to do. "Well, come on, then. Isn't anyone else hungry? I hate dining alone. It makes me feel so unloved." "I did not prepare them, Rip Red," said Vicus. "Clearly," said the rat. "Clearly my arrival is an unexpected pleasure." He went to work on his beef bone, making an awful scraping sound. "Meet you, Rip Red, the gnawer," said Vicus to the group. "He shall be joining the quest as your guide." There was a quick, breathy sound as half of those gathered inhaled sharply. A long pause followed in which no one exhaled. Gregor tried to make sense of what Vicus had announced so calmly. A rat. He was leaving them in the hands of a rat. Gregor wanted to object, but his throat had frozen. Finally, Luxa spoke up in a voice hoarse with hatred. "No, he shall not. We do not travel with rats." "The prophecy of Gray requires it, Luxa," said Solivet. "One gnawer beside." Beside could mean anything, snarled Henry. Perhaps we leave the Gnar dead beside us. Perhaps you do, but having witnessed your last attack, I doubt it, said Ripred, starting on a wedge of cheese. We have killed 5 rats since midday, said Luxa. You mean the idiots that I handpicked for cowardness and ineptitude? Oh, yes, bravo. Your Highness, that was a masterly piece of combat, said Ripred, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Do not flatter yourself. You have yet fought a rat. They themselves killed Finger and Shed.
Good morning, everybody. Now, there's something special for you in the front office. Ho, ho, ho.
They themselves killed Finger and Shed, said Marith bravely. Well, then, I stand corrected. Finger and Shed were excellent fighters on the rare occasion they were sober, said Ripred. However, I expect they were outnumbered and somewhat thrown by the arrival of your warrior. What say you, warrior? Do you refuse to go with me as well? Gregor looked into Ripred's mocking, tortured eyes. He wanted to refuse, but if he did, could he ever find his dad? As if following his thoughts, Vicus spoke up. You need Ripred to guide you to your father. These tunnels are unmapped by humans. You could never find your way without him. Still, he was a rat. Gregor had only been in the Underland a few days, and he already despised rats. They had killed Luxa and Henry's parents, imprisoned his father, and almost eaten him and Boots. He felt a kind of power surging through him when he thought of how much he hated them. But if all rats were bad, who was this strange creature staring at them from across the fire, offering to be their guide? So, what's in this for you? Said Gregor to Ripred. A fair question, said Ripred. Well, warrior, I am planning to overthrow King Gregor, and I need you to help me. By doing what? Said Gregor. I don't know, admitted Ripred. None of us does. Gregor rose and caught Vicus by the arm. I have to talk to you alone, he said. The anger in his voice surprised even himself. Well, he was angry. The rat was not part of what he'd agreed to. This was not what he'd signed on for. Vicus took Gregor's mood in stride. Maybe he had expected it. They walked about 20 yards away from the group. So, how long have you had this plan with the rat? Asked Gregor. Vicus thought for a moment. I am not sure exactly. Perhaps 2 or so years. Of course, it was all dependent upon your arrival. How come you didn't tell me about it before? Demanded Gregor. I do not believe in giving people more information than they can handle, said Vicus. Who says I can't handle it? I can handle it, said Gregor, obviously not handling it. Perhaps you can, at least more easily than Luxa and Henry. I may well have told you if we had ever finished our discussion of the prophecy of Grey, said Vicus. No doubt you would have asked, and yes, I may well have told you. Gregor pulled the prophecy from his pocket and said, Let's finish it now. He searched out the part of the prophecy where they'd left off. 1 Gnar beside and 1 lost up ahead. So, Ripred is the Gnar, and my dad is the 1 lost up ahead, said Gregor. He read on. And 8 will be left when we count up the dead. What does that mean? Asked Gregor, pointing to the line. If you add up all the players in the prophecy, 2 over, 2 under, 2 flyers, 2 crawlers, 2 spinners, 1 Gnar, and 1 lost, you have 12, said Vicus gravely. By the end of the quest, only 8 will remain alive. 4 will be dead, but no one knows what for. Oh, said Gregor, stunned. He'd heard the words before, but they only registered now. 4 of us dead. But 8 alive, Gregor, said Vicus gently, and perhaps a world saved. Gregor couldn't deal with that part now, wondering who would be left standing at the end of the day. He pushed on to the final stanza of the prophecy. The last who will die must decide where he stands. The fate of the 8 is contained in his hands. So bid him take care, bid him look where he leaps, as life may be death, and death life again reaps. I don't get this last part, said Gregor. Nor do I, nor does anyone. It is very cryptic. I believe no one will fully understand it until the final moment has arrived, said Vicus. Gregor, it is not pleasant, it is not easy, but it is essential what I ask you to do. Essential to you if you wish to find your father. Essential for my people, if they are to survive. Gregor felt his anger ebbing and fear filling the empty spaces it left. He took another tack. I don't want to go with the rat, said Gregor, almost pleadingly. He'll kill us. No, You cannot judge Rip Red by what you know of other rats. He has wisdom unique in any creature. Things were not always so bad between humans and rats. When Solomon and Rip Red and I were younger, we lived in relative peace. Rip Red would see that restored, but King Gregor wishes all humans dead, said Vicus. So you're saying Rip Red's a good brat? Said Gregor, choking on the words. If he were not, would I trust my granddaughter to his care? Asked Vicus. Your granddaughter? Asked Gregor blankly. Luxa's mother was my daughter, Judith, said Vicus. You're her grandpa? Why does she call you Vicus? Asked Gregor. These people were so weird and formal. How could he have not known that? It is our way, said Vicus. Look after her. If this is hard for you, know it is torture for Luxa. I haven't said I'm going yet, said Gregor. He looked into the old man's eyes. All right, I'm going. Is there anything else I need to know that you haven't told me? Only this. Despite what I said, I knew you were the warrior from the first moment I spied you, said Vicus. Thanks. Great. That's very helpful, said Gregor, and they returned to the group. Okay, Boots and I are going with the rat. Who else is in? There was a pause. Where goes the princess, go we, said Temp. What say you, Luxa, said Vicus. What can I say, Vicus? Can I return to our people and tell them I withdrew from the quest when our survival hangs in the balance? Said Luxa bitterly. Of course you cannot, Luxa. This is why he times it so, said Henry. You could choose to, started Vicus. I could choose, retorted Luxa. Do not offer me a choice when you know none exists. She and Henry turned their backs on Vicus. Flyers, said Sullivan, as Vicus seemed to have lost the ability to talk. Aurora and I go with our bonds, sputtered Ares. Then it is settled. Come. Meredith, we are needed at home, said Sullivan. A distraught Meredith quickly made up packs of food for the members of the quest. Fly you high, all of you, she said in a strained voice, and climbed on his bat. Sullivan mounted her bat and unrolled her map, while Rip Red helped her work out the safest route back to Regalia. Vicus moved to Henry and Luxa. Neither of them would turn to look at him. I would not part this way, but I understand your hearts. Perhaps one day you will be able to forgive me this moment. Fly you high, Henry. Fly you high, Luxa, said Vicus. He waited for a response, but none came. He turned and climbed heavily onto his bat. As miserable as Gregor felt about being dumped with a rat, his heart ached for Vicus. He wanted to scream at Luxa, Say something! Don't let your grandpa fly off like that! 4 of us aren't coming back! But the words caught in his throat. Part of him wasn't ready to forgive Vicus for abandoning them, either. Fly you high, Gregor the Overlander, said Vicus. Gregor struggled with how to respond. Should we ignore Vicus? Let him know that none of them, not even an Overlander, could forgive him? Just as he had steeled himself against replying, Gregor thought of the last 2 years, 7 months, and it was 15 days now. There were so many things he wished he had said to his dad when he'd had the chance. Things like how special it was when they went on the roof at night and tried to find stars, or how much he loved it when they took the subway out to the stadium to watch a baseball game, or just that he felt lucky that out of all the people in the world, his dad was his dad. He didn't have room inside for any more unspoken words. The bats were rising into the air. He only had a second. Fly you high, Vicus, he yelled. Fly you high. Vicus turned back, and Gregor could see tears shining on his cheeks. He lifted up a hand to Gregor in thanks, and then they were gone. Wow. Hopefully, you took heed to what Gregor was thinking. Sometimes we don't let those that are close to us know how special they are. And we need to let people know just how important they are in our lives and not take people for granted. And this is especially true at this time of year. I have left not questions for you this time, but some vocabulary that I want you to go back and see if you can determine from the text. Try to figure these words out. If not, I have left a dictionary for you. Have fun.